Okay, so to get started for this week, last time, just a brief recap, if you weren't here, we installed some software and we went over using Git, and we're going to review some of that today and look at some new stuff. Before we get too far though, I do want to call attention to this little chart. So this week, FRC put out their usage statistics from what every team in FRC did this past year. One of the things included in that report is a list of every language used by a team, as well as what framework they used. They don't have any graphs, it's just raw data, so here's a chart I compiled. If you look down here, those are the teams using C++. If you look over here, these are the teams using Python. If you look over here, these are the teams using LabVIEW. Those are 3 of the 4 officially supported languages. And if you look right here, these are the teams using Java. So in total, we've got probably about 2,200 here, plus another 500, so at least 2,700 teams out of the 3,300 or so use Java. This tall peak right here specifically is the command-based Java, which we will get into, but it's not where we're starting out. The orange bar is the timed Java, which we're looking at. So that is something neat, and if you go look at the data, they've got it on their blog. There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. If you want to read through it, it's worth a look. So today, we got a few things we want to talk about. So last time, we installed 2 pieces of software. One of them was the WPI-lib, which includes VS Code, and VS Code is the primary tool that we'll use to write code. And the other piece of software we installed was GitHub Desktop. And we installed that because a lot of you are new to using source control and programming, so we don't want to dive headfirst into the command line for that, so we're going to go with training wheels. Now, the other piece of software that we installed before tonight is called the FRC Game Tools. And hopefully we're not going to touch on that tonight, but it's a very important thing to install. Unlike these other 2 pieces of software, this is a Windows-only tool. So you can't install it on a Mac, you can't install it on Linux. You can install WPI-lib on Mac or Linux, and then GitHub Desktop has a Mac installer. I don't think they have a Linux installer, though. So that's a brief recap, and we talked about using, last time, we talked about using Git. And Git is a way for us to track our changes and all that fun stuff. And if you weren't here last time, don't worry, because we're going to do some more of that today when we get started. So I'm going to switch over, and we're going to start with looking at some Visual Studio Code stuff. So if you don't already have it open, make sure you open up the WPI-lib VS Code. And I'm going to make sure I have mine on the right screen before we do anything else. All right. So this is what VS Code looks like when you install it. And the problem is every VS Code looks like this when you install it, including not WPI-lib. Does anybody remember from last time what's the giveaway?
The W symbol on the top right.
Yeah, we got this little W hexagon in the top right. If you don't see that symbol, you probably don't have the right thing open. Okay, so we're going to take a little tour of Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to open up just a test project I have, just so that we can see all of it. Don't necessarily worry about following along with this on yours. I'm going to point everything out on mine. So when you've got VS Code open with no files open, and you've got your project open, I've got a project open right over here, you'll probably see this here in the middle. There's not a lot going on here, but it does give you some handy commands, and we're going to touch on some of these as we go. The first place I want you to look is over here on the left. Now, this bar is actually customizable. It's called the activity bar. You can have it on the side, You can have it on the top and it comes up here, but we don't want to do that, so I'm going to undo that. Activity bar, I'm going to get that back. So activity bar could be on the left, it could be hidden, whatever. I'm going to change it back to being on the side there. So this is the activity bar. There's a whole bunch of stuff over here. The first thing is Explorer. Explorer will let you see the file or the folder you currently have open. So I've got my test repo open. That's a handy thing for me to know. But you also have the option to add files, add folders. You can collapse it so you're not seeing everything expanded out. And there's more things you can do here. But the big things here are see your files, create new folders. Any questions on what that's doing for you? And you can tell it's the Explorer because it's got these two pieces of paper in the icon. And if you hover over it, it says Explorer, and it even tells you the shortcut to open it. The second thing over here is the search bar. Now, if I have a file open, let's say this file, and I press, let's see, if I were to press, and I were to press Control F. That pulls up the search just like it does for any other tool you've ever used. The problem with that is that only is letting you search in this one file. So if I want to find the word sum, it'll highlight it for me. But if I click on the magnifying glass and I type in the word sum here, it'll actually search the entire folder I have open. So this is really handy if you're trying to remember where was that thing, use the search button. It's also got the replace feature. You can turn on other things like, hey, it's got to match the case exactly. So if I'm looking for sum in all caps, it won't find it. So there's a lot of handy things there. Another button over here is this little, you got lines and circles. This is the source control button. This is actually just another way of seeing the Git stuff. I'm going to advise that you don't use this, especially because we're using GitHub Desktop. The reason for that you'll see in just a little while. You've got this run and debug section here. If you're programming in some other tools, you'll use this more often. You won't use this tool a whole lot in the FRC programming. We usually launch it a different way. And the last one over here we really want to talk about are these blocks. These are the extensions. So by default, some extensions get installed with WPILib, some don't. The big ones, for example, C, C++, the debugger for Java, Java language support, project manager for Java, and the WPILib extension. These are all things that get installed on top of your VS Code so that it can do more things. There's also things you can do to customize it. For example, VS Code Icons is an extension you can install that gives you, cool looking icons for your file types. So not a lot going on here. But they also have things like themes. So if you want to customize what VS Code looks like, you can install a theme. A word of advice here is don't go crazy with extensions. The ones that are installed by default you have to have, otherwise WPILib won't work. But there are some others you can install that you may want to install. Again, use whatever feels like it'll help you, but don't go crazy with it. If you ever encounter something behaving weird, check your extensions. You might need to disable or uninstall an extension to get it working right. So that's where you would go to find those. Any questions on this activity bar over here? Okay. So that's kind of the big place to be. Now, the keyboard shortcuts that you're familiar with, if you do Control W, it'll close the tab. If you do Control W again, it'll close another tab. Right? And if I can do that with closing all my tabs. And so there's a lot of things you'll find, like Control S to save, and you can find a lot of those under File. The more you get comfortable with your shortcuts, the better the tool will work for you. So the other thing we're going to look at is this button over here. So if I click on the WPI lib button with everything closed, that's going to open up what's called the command palette. And the command palette has a lot of things you can do. It has a lot of commands. If you want to open up the command palette with a shortcut, it's Control-Shift-P. And that opens the command palette with all of the commands. The difference being when you click the button, it gives you the command palette with just the WPI lib commands. So there's a few things you'll find here. We talked about it last time. What's the command you use to make a new project? It's probably create a new project. So use a create a new project to make a new project, and then you'll use the build command to build the code. You'll use deploy to send code to a robot, and there's a few other commands there, but we'll look at those when it's time to look at them. Any questions up to that point? Okay. So there's a whole lot of other things in VS Code, but those are kind of like the 100,000 foot view so that you can see everything and get going there.